Stories bigger than Texas, the Alamo podcast. Remember the Alamo. That iconic battle cry is now known throughout the world. Born out of the decisive loss at the Alamo, these stirring words galvanized the decisive victory at San Jacinto that ended the Texas Revolution for good. Today we reveal what led up to the Battle of San Jacinto, how its 18 minutes of fighting changed not just Texas, but the world, and the important ways history is being preserved at this East Texas battlefield. I'm your host, Emily Baucom. We're joined today by Cecilia Abad, Curator of the San Jacinto Museum and Battlefield Association. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Our story left off with the front lines of the Texas Revolution moving eastward. What was the strategic importance of moving east, particularly with the Gulf coastline?
Shifting the battleground of the Texas Revolution eastward, particularly toward the Gulf coastline, held significant strategic value. By moving the army to the east, it provided crucial time for training Texian soldiers to give his troops the necessary time to prepare for combat. Houston's choice to retreat was met with disapproval from some Texas rebels who were eager for confrontation with the Mexicans. However, Houston persisted in organizing, training, and equipping his troops to ensure that they would get ready to face Santa Anna's army. After nearly a month of falling back, Houston finally directed his men to turn around and march south to confront Santa Anna's forces. This tactical maneuver not only created distance between the Mexican army and the Texian forces, but also allowed the Texas Navy to extend the Mexican supply lines further eastward. The control over the coastline also prevented Mexican reinforcements from reaching Texas by sea, effectively isolating the Mexican forces already present in the region.
We now know this is all leading up to the Battle of San Jacinto on April 21st. Of course, they don't know that. How are the Texans spending the first few weeks of April?
The Texan forces led by General Sam Houston were in full swing, strategizing and getting their troops organized, rallying support and reinforcing their positions. Efforts to organize the troops began as early as March 6th. However, the final days of March and the start of April were plagued by relentless cold and rainy weather. With a few cases of measles reported, General Houston took action establishing a hospital across the Brazos River on April 1st to care for the sick. Meanwhile, the time spent near San Felipe allowed Houston to instill discipline in his troops, with Captain Robert Calder tasked with teaching obedience, a skill many lacked from previous military experiences. Houston diligently worked to familiarize his troops with 19th century warfare tactics, drilling them extensively on forming lines, volley firing, and quick-step advancements. Despite some discontent among those skeptical of Houston's approach, he succeeded in instilling the fundamentals of battle formation. Reorganization within the camp also took place. Some of the units were dismantled and basically brought together. As Houston awaited news of the enemy's movement, his spies were out active, gaining intelligence from the Mexican forces and where they were at.
We have listeners from all over the world who may have been to the Alamo, but not to San Jacinto. Describe for us the landscape and climate, because the Houston area is very different from San Antonio.
San Jacinto, near present-day Houston, is characterized by flat terrain with marshes, prairies, and dense forests. The climate is typically humid subtropical with hot, humid summers and mild winters. The area around San Jacinto provided ample cover for both Texan and Mexican forces, with its thick vegetation and marshy terrain making it suitable for guerrilla war tactics. Now, the terrain was advantageous for Sam Houston and the Texian army because it was familiar to them, whereas a Mexican soldier was quoted as saying that although they were fighting in Mexican territory, it felt like a foreign land.
That's fascinating. Sam Houston is known for giving this rousing speech in the days before the battle. Remember the Alamo, remember Goliad. Tell us about that speech and how those rallying cries galvanized the troops.
On April 19th, the Texas Army gathered around to cross the Buffalo Bayou, and this is where Houston made his speech. He basically said that he will meet the enemy and that some of us may be killed and must be killed, end quote. He ended his speech with the famous words, "Soldiers, remember the Alamo, the Alamo, the Alamo." They then crossed the bayou. On March 19th, they marched toward Lynch's Ferry, and by 2 a.m., they kind of called off and they rested. By early morning of April 20th, they woke up really early and they continued to march towards San Jacinto River into Lynch's Ferry, arriving there. When they arrived, the Mexican army had not arrived yet, so the Texian army prepared for the enemy to arrive by establishing a camp. The Texian army was camped around the oak trees that surrounded the Texas camp, allowing them to have some sort of cover against the Mexican army.
The Battle of San Jacinto lasted just 18 minutes. How did it start and what happened during those 18 minutes?
April 21st, they wake up early. They're not ready to fight. The Mexican army is on the other side. Sam Houston tells Erastus F. Smith to burn down Vince's Bridge. He selects 6 people to go and burn it down. By 2:20 p.m. on April 21st, Houston called the Texians to line up. They had approximately about 930 men. At the center was the artillery and the Twin Sisters cannons. To the far right was the Texas cavalry. Now, a little thing about the Texas Army, most of them did not have actual soldier uniforms. They were just wearing civilian clothes. They had any weapons that they could get, long rifles, Bowie knives, hatchets, muskets, shotguns. By 4 p.m., Houston ordered his troops to march through the tall grass to basically be ready to attack the Mexican camp. Colonel Sidney Sherman's infantry moved from the left, and it was his men who burst into the open on the Mexican camp. Marabou B. Lamar would come charging from the right side towards the Mexican camp, and then the fighting really began. This caught the Mexican army off guard. They attempted to organize themselves, but were unable to. There was some hand-to-hand combat with the Mexican troops, but eventually they did get overwhelmed. Many soldiers began to flee towards Peggy's Lake, and eventually Santa Anna would then scramble away, grabbing a horse and fleeing away. With that said, I have to say that by April, you have to keep in mind that these men have been traveling for like a month, almost a month, right? And they get stuck by the end of March and early April. There's heavy, dense rain. These men aren't sleeping well. This goes for both the Texian and the Mexican army. So by the time the Mexican army arrives on the battleground itself on March the 20th, Santa Anna has his men basically being up because they're thinking that they're about to fight. And so they're building their barricades, they're getting their camp set up. They don't sleep that night. By April 21st, they do get reinforcements. They are thinking that they're going to fight during the day of April 21st, but they don't. So by the time that it's already late afternoon, Santa Anna gives orders for his men to basically go and rest. And so that's when they decided to go and rest. Usually there was no fighting that takes place in the late afternoon into the evening. So Santa Anna was not expecting that. This is how they're basically overwhelmed and were unsure what's going on whenever they were attacked.
But there was significant bloodshed for hours after the battle, with Mexican soldiers retreating into a nearby lake. What happened there?
So after the 18-minute mark, as they're being overwhelmed, many of these Mexican soldiers did surrender. They put down their swords and weapons, but others ended up fleeing towards Peggy's Lake into the marsh. And as they're fleeing towards the marsh, they don't realize it's a marsh, but then they get stuck in this mud. The Texians inflicted heavy casualties on the Mexican forces. At some point, I'm sure Houston was wondering why the killing is still taking place. Sam Houston's famous quote, "Gentlemen, I applaud your bravery, but damn your manners," is attributed to his frustration with the Texas troops, a pursuit of retreating Mexican soldiers. Despite his orders to spare them, the pursuit resulted in further casualties among the Mexican forces as they were hunted down and captured or killed by the Texians.
Santa Anna was not killed or captured in the battle. He was captured the next day. How was he captured, and what were the negotiations to end the revolution?
Santa Anna was captured the day after the Battle of San Jacinto on April 22nd, 1836. He came to Vince's Bayou and noticed that the bridge had been burned down. He didn't know how to swim, so he hid within the groves of the tree and spent the night there. By 11 a.m. the next day, he was captured. When he entered the Texian camp, the Mexican POWs noticed him and began to say, "El Presidente," making the Texians realize that, oh, this is the Mexican president, Santa Anna. Some Texians wanted him to die, but Houston did recognize that Santa Anna alive was much more valuable to the Texians. Following the Battle of San Jacinto and the signing of the Treaty of Velasco, Mexico did formally recognize the Republic of Texas. The Treaty of Velasco, signed on March 14, 1836, formally recognized the independence of the Republic of Texas and established the boundaries between Texas and Mexico. As part of the treaty negotiations, Santa Anna agreed to withdraw his troops from Texas and promised to lobby the Mexican government for official recognition of Texas independence.
The Treaty of Velasco is actually part of the Phil Collins collection. It's been on display at the Alamo exhibit at the Ralston Family Collection Center for anyone who wants to come see it. We also have on display in that same exhibit the gold snuff box that Santa Anna gave Sam Houston for sparing his life. Mexico did not formally recognize the Republic of Texas, but these events marked the end of any official military expeditions.
Mexico did not recognize the Republic of Texas. They still viewed it as Texas being in rebellion. So you will have some expeditions that will end up taking place after the Battle of San Jacinto.
Kind of skirmishes more.
Skirmishes, yes.
Sam Houston, who was injured during the battle, sees his star truly rise in the wake of victory. What happens next for him?
Sam Houston's role as a hero of the Battle of San Jacinto elevated his stature and leadership within the Texan community. Despite being injured during the battle, Houston's decisive victory over the Mexican forces ensured his place in Texas history for sure. He ends up becoming president of the Republic, and then he is also elected another time as well for the Republic as well as president.
After the battle, what happens at San Jacinto? I understand there was some kind of argument over burying the bodies.
Yes. The fighting took place in a woman's farm. Her name was Margaret McCormick. She was from Ireland. During the battle, McCormick and her son left the property, but when they returned, they saw that there was dead bodies all over her property. Their cattle had been killed by both armies. There was decomposing bodies of Mexican soldiers. They were just left behind. Peggy ended up demanding Houston to bury the bodies, and Houston refused to do so. But he tried to kind of calm her down and basically said, your property is going to become famous. And Peggy's response to him was, quote, to the devil with your glorious history. No one wants to live in a place where you have hundreds of decomposing bodies. The Texans who were killed during the battle were buried. And then there was one Mexican general that was buried. And that was Lorenzo de Zavala's friend, who at the time, Lorenzo de Zavala was the vice president of the Republic.
Who decided this is a place we should preserve for the historic record?
Through the effort of the members of the DRT, the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, and specifically the San Jacinto chapter and the Sons of the Republic, SRT, they championed the historical conservation of the battleground and eventually the construction of the memorial. The San Jacinto chapter served as the battleground's hostess, providing tours for state officials over a period of 50 years. The DRT battled through funding issues, state legislature changes, governor vetoes, local mishandling of the land to secure the battleground. By 1901, the state of Texas owned 227 acres, and today the battleground site covers a total of about 1,300 acres, and it continues to be preserved today.
And really, when people arrive at San Jacinto, they see the monument. Tell us about when it was built and what's inscribed on the side.
So in 1936, the centennial anniversary of the battle, the San Jacinto Monument was erected to honor the Texian soldiers and their victory over the Mexican forces. The monument, located near the battleground, stands as the world's tallest masonry column and is adorned with the inscriptions commemorating the historic significance of the battle itself. And so when you walk around, you'll notice that there are friezes, and those friezes depict historical moments within the Republic's history, basically.
The battle site was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1960.
Correct. Yes. The San Jacinto Monument was completed in 1939, and then it was designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1960. The monument features important inscriptions detailing the events of the Battle of San Jacinto and honoring the Texas soldiers.
And every year, the site marks the Battle of San Jacinto. Tell us about San Jacinto Day.
Every weekend of April 21st, in order to honor the Battle of San Jacinto, the site celebrates the independence of the Republic by having ceremonies and reenactments of the battle itself. We'll have educational programs highlighting the significance of the battle in Texas history.
And if people can't come to San Jacinto Day but want to plan a visit, what will they be able to see and do?
So the site itself, you can drive around and you can stop at each of the important locations where the battle or skirmishes took place. We have interpretive signages all throughout the battleground itself. Then at the base of the monument, we have the San Jacinto Museum. We have a movie that's about 30 or so minutes, and it talks about the history of the Texas Revolution. But then we also have a permanent exhibit that has a whole bunch of artifacts from the Texas Revolution, as well as a special exhibit that focuses on after the Battle of San Jacinto. We also have access to the observation deck, so visitors are able to take an elevator ride all the way to the top of the monument, and you can see the grounds. You basically have a 360 view, almost a 360 view of the battleground, and it's a beautiful view.
Very cool. What is the legacy of the Battle of San Jacinto? It had quite a domino effect across North America and even Western Europe.
It really did. It opened up Texas eventually. When Texas got acquired by the United States, right, it would end up opening all of that land, all of Texas, and then eventually the western side of the United States due to the US-Mexican War for US expansionism and the concept of manifest destiny, where a lot of people ended up traveling and moving west with the gold rush. And it changed the terrain of not only the US, but also Mexico itself geographically.
It was only 18 minutes of battle, but it leaves quite the legacy. And when people come visit, what do they feel? What do they tell you that is their takeaway?
I think when people enter, when they arrive at the site, I think it's a very overwhelming feeling. And you realize that an actual battle where people fought for something that they believed in, and just with anything that they had, right? They were fighting with the rifles, hatchets, anything, and they were able to overwhelm a Mexican army that had been actually trained is something that's very impactful and can be very sentimental as well, especially if you know that your family is from that area and you are a proud Texan. A lot of people have that connection to the land. And then when they go into the museum and they start to see artifacts that were actually found on the battleground, it just kind of reinforces the idea that yes, these men were here. These stories are real. They were real people just like me and you. And I think that that creates a huge impact for many of these people. And then they go to the observation deck and they just see this large piece of land, and it's just overwhelmingly something special, I think, for them.
Cecilia Abad, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We are approaching 17 minutes of recording. By the time this episode is over, we'll be approaching 18 minutes, about the time the Battle of San Jacinto lasted. Be sure to check out the podcast notes. We've linked to the San Jacinto Museum and Battlefield Association's website so you can explore the rich history there. If you're able to drive to this weekend San Jacinto Day, we've linked to that page as well. We've also linked to a video about the snuff box Santa Anna gave Sam Houston and a photo of the Treaty of Velasco, artifacts you can see in person here at the Alamo. You've been listening to Stories Bigger Than Texas, the Alamo Podcast.